Everybody's Kirby and Jock here today. It's part 4 of Highland, and this is for the Monroe and Lafayette meeting. Yep. Yeah. Hi guys. Hi. Hello. Hi. Hello. Y'all. Hello. Hi. Hello. Gonna start soon. Yep. Yeah. Right. Where's the paper so we know? Event paper. Yeah, so we know. So this video is gonna be super long, guys. Okay, here it is. The back? Nothing for the back. The dramatic reading of historical letters to 2:30. Oh, there's actually... Okay, here we go. Never mind.
Thank you for being here. Let's a round of applause for the people that organized this here at the Highlands. Thank you very much. And a quick round of applause for the Maddens, Marietta and Steve, for all they do. So today's a big day because today is the 201st anniversary of Lafayette being publicly seen in the United States after a 40-year absence. In other words, 201 years ago today, Lafayette was presented at Castle Clinton in New York City. And 90,000 people came to see Lafayette that day, and the city of New York only had about 130,000 people in it anyway. So most of the city came out to see Lafayette that day. And we like to say he was America's first rock star because only 4,000 people came to see the Beatles in 1964. The American Friends of Lafayette were born in 1932 at Lafayette College. We have several board members here today with us. We have Hank Parfit. Will you raise your hand, Hank? Thank you so much. Our treasurer and secretary, Bonnie Fritz, is here today. And my boss, the president of the American Friends of Lafayette, Alan Hoffman, is here today. So a year ago today, we started this journey. Actually, a year ago yesterday, in Staten Island. But we started this journey, following Lafayette around the country, just as it happened 200 years ago. And that's why we're in Charlottesville today, because he was here the second time. Who went to our events in November in Charlottesville? Raise your hand. Thank you very much for coming in November, and thank you for coming again today. Because Marietta Madden is the only committee chair of the American Friends of Lafayette to hold an event twice. Twice.
Wow.
Don't tell Susan Minker I said that because she did it in New York. Anyway, so we have a great program today. I just wanted to introduce from the Highlands here today is Laura Musser, and she's going to take it away. Thank you very much. If you want to learn more of what we're doing at American Friends of Lafayette, visit Lafayette200.org. Next weekend we're in Culpeper, and then 2 weeks after that, everything ends. Lafayette goes back to France. That's all right, we'll be back. We're not going anywhere. We're also going to France.
Good afternoon, everyone. Many of you saw me this morning. I'm Laura Musser. I'm the Education Programs Manager here at Highland, and I've been lucky to be working with Marietta all, I almost said semester because I'm used to saying that, but for the past several months to put this together. I will be brief because this afternoon is certainly not about me talking, but it is about the reunion, as Chuck said, of these two Revolutionary War veterans and transatlantic friends, the Marquis de Lafayette and Colonel/President/ fill in the political office of your choice, James Monroe.
Oh.
I will be moderating a very special retrospective conversation between the two today, motivated by questions that you yourselves have submitted, queries you have for the two of them, and as more questions arise, please feel free to raise your hand. I have a microphone for you if you are a low talker. I am not a low talker, as you can hear, and neither are our two esteemed guests. So without further ado, I welcome them, the Marquis de Lafayette, Colonel James Monroe.
There it is. There they are, guys. Yep. There we go. Yep.
Well, welcome once again. Did most of you have your tour? Yeah, see the place. Showed the marquee around. What do you think of the farm so far?
It is a delight, and all too populated today, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the questions that they have for the two of us.
The first question from our audience is very appropriate, I think. Our guests would like to know, can you tell us more about James and Elizabeth's involvement in Adrienne, your wife's release from prison? I believe they're referring to during Monroe's first time in France in 1794.
Perhaps you would like to start by explaining your whereabouts at this time. You were not in France.
To be sure. So when we must speak about the revolution in France, perhaps inspired by the revolution that was fought here, but they are markedly different. In America, you began your revolution with the Declaration of Independence, whereas in France, it was very much a social revolution. We did not want a new country, we simply wanted to alter the monarchy, from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. The difference being is that with a constitutional monarchy, you preserve the king as the chief executive, not unlike your president, and you create a much more substantial and effective legislative body, not unlike your Congress, the English Parliament. In France, we call it an Assemblée Nationale, or a National Assembly of these elected representatives of the people. And this would be achieved rather quickly. By October the 6th of 1789, oddly enough, the date in which Mr. Jefferson departed from France, we had created this constitutional monarchy. Now, all seemed to be fine and well. We thought we had achieved our glorious revolution, not unlike the English glorious revolution of the latter part of the 17th century, with the restoration of Charles II and a great deal of positive change, but little loss of life. But not everyone in France was in favor of this constitutional monarchy. Many were in want of a republic. Now, a republic is not a bad thing. After all, you have a republic, and you've done very well with your republic. But it was the way in which that republic was created. For the King and Queen of France would be arrested for crimes against the state and ultimately sentenced to death by a new device referred to as the Louisette, which I think you know much better as the guillotine. Well, when you execute what is arguably the most powerful monarchs in all of the world, it makes the rest of the monarchs of the world rather nervous. So all of Europe declared war upon France, and that is where I, General Lafayette, grew unpopular. So unpopular that I was called to Paris, where I too would have faced a trial and undoubtedly been sent to the guillotine. So instead, our son had been dispatched to America to grow up with his namesake at Mount Vernon. But my wife and daughters would slowly but surely be arrested for crimes against the state and imprisoned. Oddly enough, imprisoned at the Collège du Plessis at the Luxembourg, on the left bank of the River Seine, the same school that I had attended when I was 14 years of age. Well, I fled into the Austrian Netherlands, and because Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France, was in fact Austrian, a Habsburg, instead of allowing me my parole, meaning your word as an officer and a gentleman, that you would not take part in any more hostile actions in that theater of operations, they refused it, and they imprisoned me, going from Liège to Mayence and ultimately to the fortress city of Olmütz. That is when I lost track of what was occurring in France as a result of the horrible change, the convention that was created, the committees of public safety headed by men like Marat, Danton, Saint-Just, and the most famous, Robespierre. But my wife and many members of the aristocracy, had they not fled from France, were in fact imprisoned, awaiting a trial to be sent to that new device, the guillotine. But it would be shortly after the transition from the convention, from the fall of Robespierre, that you would arrive, my dear friend.
I did. Thank you for the articulate description of the condition of France during the time of my arrival, as I was appointed at this time by President Washington to be Minister Plenipotentiary to Paris. It was not the same Paris that Jefferson encountered during his time in that position. For wheat was at $20 a barrel. We witnessed the absolute travesty in the aftermath of this reign of terror, which ended just abruptly. I mean, days before my arrival. I think it was just days before my arrival that Robespierre was beheaded. So it was very, very different, very contentious, and very unsettling. My first act as your minister there was to retrieve someone from jail. Not your lady, but it was Thomas Paine, who had been arrested likewise for pamphleteering in favor of libertarian ideas. And so he, being an American citizen, as I believe you were an honorary American citizen yourself by this time, had you been there, I probably could have enacted on your behalf. But your wife, not being of American citizenry, I had no jurisdiction or the ability to take action. However, as you put it, this revolution was a social one. At a time where any semblance of aristocracy was looked upon with derision and accusation and an acute eye, we dolled my wife up in her finest gown. She had an idea. This finest gown and the finest carriage that could be had. Received a fresh coat of paint and a team of 6 persons, the finest horses we could find, and then paraded up and down the streets of Paris on her way to pay call to your wife there in prison. This visit resulted in what I'm sure your wife relayed to you is quite a start, for she had thought that when the jailer came to her door that her time to meet Madame Guillotine had come. But when she found out that it was this new woman, this American woman that she had never met before, but once she figured out who she was immediately relieved. For I think it was your mother-in-law, your grandmother-in-law, and your sister-in-law were all beheaded prior to this.
Been sent to the guillotine.
And so this display of opulence and wealth that my wife created a public stir, because everyone said, well, who is that? Who would have such audacity to be looking like that? Oh, it's the American wife, it's the American minister's wife. Well, why, or was she going? What was she doing? This created a public stir, which immediately enlivened the public debate as to the condition of your wife. Aristocratic woman, because she was the wife of our American hero. And we raised the funds to send off to Orleans to join you.
Fittingly so.
We're all very excited to hear this. There is, I think, an appropriate follow-up question to this, which, while you were imprisoned in Austria, what news, if any, were you able to receive about Adrian and the children's situation?
Yes, a superb question in regards to while I was imprisoned at Olmütz. What news, what information was I able to acquire while I was in that position? Not much at all. Of course, the Austrians were not so ready and willing to provide me with information that I had wanted. There was a very odd system at Olmütz. You see, I was kept in a prison that was a former Jesuit monastery. And it had been converted into a prison for those undesirables of the Austrian Empire. And I was considered to be one of those said undesirables. Those that were imprisoned in that place were given coins, and the coin's monetary value mattered not. But a coin could purchase you something. For example, food, pen, paper, information. I was bestowed with 3 coins. And so thus I could, at one moment, buy some food, get information, perhaps look at a gazette. And that is how I was living my life up to that moment. But even those coins could not provide me with all of the information that I was given. Lo and behold, shortly after her release, my wife and 2 daughters joined me in the prison at Olmütz. I was not increased in my coins to provide for me. I still had to maintain with my wife and 2 daughters, with these 3 coins, food and any information that we were to have. So it was only then that I realized that she had escaped the guillotine and any hardship while she was in Paris. So it was a very difficult time, a grueling time, Some information was sent from the Americas in my direction, but it did not always reach my ears or my eyes to read upon what had occurred. A most challenging time. And I am forever thankful in 1797 for my release from that Severn prison due to the Treaty of Campo Formio, in which the French Republic signed with the Austrian Empire. But even that being said, we were still not permitted to return back to our home. I would have had to have sworn allegiance to the new government called the Directoire that had replaced Robespierre, and I refused to do such a thing, for I continued to believe in the constitutional monarchy.
Thank you so much. I'm curious, Colonel Monroe, and this is my personal question, going off of this, you were not able to provide aid to Adrienne as a government representative, but were you able to assist her personally in any way?
Yes, I was not able to aid her with government or official monies or anything of that nature, but I tell you what, in order to help Adrienne, your daughter, we put her up temporarily in our home, and I can admit she was a much better guest than Thomas Paine. She didn't drink up all my wine. But that was temporary because we, as she did, being such a devoted wife, I just can't say enough, because my wife, as we spoke last night, you and her were separated for the vast majority of your career. So I can't imagine the sacrifices she had to compared to my life. But we kept her there long enough. And then we were able to ship her off to
I'm pausing for questions from the crowd.
I believe we have some questions over there.
Back in regards to that, I often said that I not only had the most beautiful wife in all of the world, but much more importantly, the most understanding wife in the world. Because when I had decided to come to America for the first time in 1777, though she was aware that I was most interested in coming, I did not exactly tell her when I was going, nor for how long I was going. And I was initially gone for 2 long years. But no doubt all of you ladies would be equally supportive of your husbands if they disappeared for 2 years. In truth, after the engagement at Brandywine, in which Monsieur Monroe and I met for the first time, and I was wounded, the report came to Versailles that I had died. So there was a time in which she thought that her husband had passed on, only to be surprised with news that I still thrived and lived. Yes, madame.
Do you want to tell us why you didn't tell her?
Why, the question is, would I like to tell you why I did not tell her? Well, being that the king, Louis XVI, did not want any of his officers to go to America to perhaps bring about yet another war with England. We had just sustained a horrible defeat against England in what is known as the 7 Years' War. You often refer to it here in the Americas as the French and Indian War, of which there are some who believe that it was a young Colonel Washington who began that war by firing upon a French diplomatic party at Jumonville Glen. But that's another story. But regardless, he did not want his officers going to side themselves with the Americans that could perhaps precipitate a war with England. Now, there were others who had preceded me. The Marquis de Rouerie, better known as Colonel Armand, had come to America, but he was fleeing from a duel he had fought with the king's cousin over an affair, but that's another story as well. But regardless, the name Lafayette is well known in France, and if I had sided myself with the Americans, that perhaps could have initiated a war. So at first he refused me, and then I had to escape from France without the king's knowledge. And that is why I did not inform my wife, because I did not want her to be complicit in this plan of action that I was making. And I thought it was best that I could just simply inform her through letters. Yes, monsieur.
In general, Lafayette, you seem as if you were the most uniquely positioned person to aid the American cause because you had connections in Versailles. And then you were very uniquely positioned when as a bridge between the people. But then it seemed that you looking back now from the was that just your position
Indeed, Monsieur asks in regards to the success or failure of my career, most notably during the French Revolution. Indeed, Monsieur, in the beginning of that said revolution, by the 14 Juillet, the 14th of July, the storming of the Bastille, that symbol of tyranny within France, by the 15th of July, I had created the Garde Nationale de Paris, which was a military force to keep order in a very volatile city of 650,000 people. So thus, as using your words, I was a person that could be a go-between, between the monarchy, the second estate, the aristocracy, and the common man of the third estate, and the people of France. I would also write a document, or assist in a great part of writing a document called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen with our dear friend, Monsieur Jefferson.
That was in his parlor, was it not?
Indeed it was, in August of 1789. And in this said document, it was a preamble to all French constitutions in which I spoke about those natural rights of mankind that all people, regardless of their nation, should be able to enjoy. Some of them being life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness, and freedom from oppression. This would be put in place. But shortly thereafter, things would begin to change. By 1791, the king made an escape from France, often referred to as the flight to Varennes. Varennes being a city to the northeast of Paris, in which he did make an attempt in which he was trying to leave France to go to the German states of the Holy Roman Empire, for he felt that he could not hold on to his kingdom. I was criticized for not looking after better the royal family. And then, of course, in July of 1791, often referred to as the massacres on the Champ de Mars, there were 10,000 elements of a radical group known as the Jacobins. They had been signing a petition to remove the monarchy, but they began to drink and began to misbehave and commit crimes. So what happens when you commit a crime? You bring in the authorities. I brought in my Garde Nationale. I told them to disperse. Control was once again kept, only for them to go to all of the restaurants, the cafes, the bars in France, and then return, even more intoxicated than they were before, committing more crimes, killing members of the Garde Nationale. So what could be done? Well, the Garde Nationale needed to be brought in. And I regret the decision of having my men fire upon them, for the newspapers were not very kind to me. I was forced to resign my commission the next day, as well as the mayor of Paris, Monsieur Bailly, as a result of that, and things never appeared to be the same again. Of course, we would see the transition from the monarchy to the republic, to the convention, and to the monsters in the forms of the committees of public safety. What could have been done different, Monsieur? Perhaps had I not fired upon them. Perhaps had the king embraced the constitutional monarchy a bit more than that. Perhaps some concessions could have been made with members of the Third Estate in the National Assembly. Indeed, I do believe things could have been done that could have provided a better outcome. But as a result, I had rolled my dice, Monsieur, and I had to be content with the results that were upon them. There is always room for improvement. I am a firm believer in that. Yes, Monsieur.
Let me get the mic over there. I think from a distance, sorry to speak up.
I think from a distance things become condensed, and what people see are the Bastille, the introduction of the National Razor, and Reign of Terror. Was there a document, I guess I can think of it as opposite of yours, that laid out the rationale for the transition from a constitutional monarchy to a republic?
Indeed, many people, in regards to your question as to from the constitutional monarchy to the republic, what was the reasoning behind that? Many of the 24 million citizens within the confines of the Kingdom of France were tired of monarchy. From whether it be the formation of Charlemagne being crowned by the Pope in Rome in 800 AD to the various kings of France. Absolute monarchs were not always the most efficient in the ruling of France. If you have an enlightened monarch, your people will prosper. But if you do not have an enlightened monarch, the people will suffer. And more often than not, the people of France were suffering from a lack of an enlightened monarch. I dare say you could say Louis XIV was the last of the enlightened monarchs, but even the end of his reign, by 1715, spelled disaster, war, and death for all of France. So I think, like a pendulum going back and forth, the people of France were in want of some sort of change, looking to the example across the ocean with the Americas, the success of the revolution that had taken place here, and the establishment of a republic. Many in France thought that that republic could be mirrored within France, and success could be achieved. The challenge is that it was the course, it was the way in which that republic was created that caused the greatest amount of problems. Because by arresting the King and Queen of France, and then sentencing them to death, of course being that the vast majority of governments within Europe itself were in fact monarchies, they did not want those ideas of liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, and brotherhood to become contagious and be on the lips of their citizens, else their monarchies would be destroyed as well. So I think that is what occurred, monsieur, as a result. And the transition from constitutional monarchy, a weak king not showing his authority, and the desire of those committees of public safety. And we must not forget the National Assembly, of which you received a standing ovation, as I may call, when you arrived in 1794. I did not witness it, of course, but I heard the news that you were so very popular within France. And I think that is what brought us about.
And we are still dealing with this today, as you can see, in South America. We're understanding and witnessing the same sort of conditions there as they cast out their monarchical colonizers and take up republican forms of independent government, some of which may turn to be somewhat monarchical, but of their own creation there in South America. And furthermore, 2 years ago, when many of these struggles began, and many of which are still going, well, we saw a strange, unique condition, as you witnessed there in Europe, once the Greeks finally eliminated the Ottomans and the conflict in Spain finally came to a resolution. We thought that, to put it more succinctly, the Holy Alliance, as we now call it, those monarchical powers in Europe that have already stamped out any form of republican democracy in Europe, might turn their eye back towards the colonies in the Western Hemisphere. So during an address to Congress, my annual address to Congress as president, we reinforced not only our position of neutrality in the affairs of Europe or those of South America, but personally, we offer words of encouragement to these new republics. Reinforced the idea that there were no businesses for these European powers to come back and resume their colonization of these new democracies, whether they be in South America, Mexico, or the West Indies. And so we just wanted to reinforce that. Furthermore, at that time, Alexander of Russia was, or so we thought, considering sending a fleet to reinforce his warning of sorts to the European Holy Alliance to stay out of Western Hemisphere's affairs, and we would stay out of European affairs as well.
I wonder if we might turn to a personal question and away from global politics, if just for a moment. Another guest, I almost said visitor, guest wonders about your opinions of each other, both upon your first meeting and over time. What were your first impressions of each other when you met, and how has your relationship, perhaps, or impressions deepened, grown, changed?
Indeed, if I may, James.
Yes.
Upon our first meeting, it was during the war. I had newly arrived here in the Americas in June of 1777, made my way to Philadelphia to meet with Congress to get my rank endorsed of Major General. I still laugh about that a bit because I was but 19 years of age, and your Congress had made me a Major General. In fact, as I recall, my late dear friend Alexander Hamilton said that when he in Washington spoke of it, he said, "What exactly am I supposed to do with a 19-year-old French aristocrat that Congress has just made a Major General?" I said, "I did not come to teach, I came to learn. I cannot lead until I know how to follow." And with that, Washington allowed me to join his staff. Well, it would be shortly thereafter that we would take part in the great battle at Brandywine, September the 11th of 1777. I do recall at one of the meetings of the officers that you were in the service of a General Sterling, were you not?
That's right. General Alexander, William Alexander, or Lord Sterling, as he was known to us. I had just recently convalesced from my own injury sustained during the Battle of Trenton. I took some time, about 9 weeks, to convalesce, first in Pennsylvania, and then, as was the custom for wounded officers who achieved rank from their bravery and the wounds sustained, I came back here to Virginia because the good news was I could hold a command. The problem with that was there was no command to be had, so I had to recruit one from my own auspices. Congress was illiquid. We had no funds to pay them with. Most of our officers were self-funding their own regiments. I did not have the funds and personal treasury from which to pay my soldiers, to arm them, to equip one. So I had no real luck in raising a regiment, so to speak. I returned. That's when I was given the appointment as an aide. And so that position was being held as a captain at the time. And I remember seeing you and your aides ride down to stop your men who had been routed on our flank, who had been very quickly and surprisingly cut off.
Birmingham Hill, as I recall,
Yes.
General Sullivan's division. And I had no command other than myself, and I begged and pleaded of Washington, "Please allow me to enter the fray. This is my first engagement and I must prove myself." So he allowed me to go. I rode 1 mile with my 2 aides-de-camp, Monsieur Gimard and Monsieur Colomb, rode into the action, tried to stop the men from retreating, even dismounting my horse and holding them with my 2 hands. And at that moment, a musket ball found my leg. My boot began to fill with blood, overflow with blood, madame. I thought I was going to be killed in my first engagement. But I kept my courage, I kept my strength long enough to hold the line. And it was then that Gimard and Colomb put me back on my horse and I was taken to the rear. My wound was dressed rather quickly by Washington's personal physician, and the retreat began. And the next day in Chester is where I officially met Monsieur Monroe. My wound was being dressed yet again, and as I recall, it was a surgeon from the 1st Continental Pennsylvania line. And he told you to distract me in some way, shape, or form. So, of course, Monsieur Monroe began describing the beauty of Virginia. Now, my friends, if you simply look out the windows, you can see the beauty of Virginia, but at that moment, I did not care. But regardless, began a wonderful friendship that would continue on through Valley Forge and onwards to Monmouth Courthouse in late June of '78.
Washington said, send Alexander's aide, that Monroe. He knows some French. And I said, I think he needs a doctor, not a translator. But you already spoke English, did you not? And then why couldn't they? Duponceau was somewhere nearby. You could have sent him as well. But then I had to help evacuate you to the Bethlehem Church before you were then relocated, I think, to Bethlehem.
Bethlehem, from Bristol to Bethlehem, indeed you did. And thus began that friendship. And Madame, you know, in regards to your question, how has this relationship changed? I would not see him again until really 1781, through the Yorktown campaign in 1784, with the celebration of the signing of the Treaty of Paris of September of 1783, but then we did not meet again until 1803, when you were appointed once again by Mr. Jefferson to take part in that great land acquisition known as the Louisiana Purchase.
As Minister Envoy Extraordinaire, thus having extraordinary powers of the executive, I was tasked to renegotiate a similar treaty which we had with Spain, which allowed us navigation of the Mississippi, which is of vast importance to our western territories, now states, to have that navigation of the Ohio and the Mississippi down to the Gulf of Mexico, and thus be able to prosper commercially in their enterprises in order to get their grains, goods, and products onto a global marketplace. But when the Spanish territory of Louisiana was handed back into the arms of the French, with whom we had no such treaty, I was sent to renegotiate and reestablish these similar terms. The funds allowed me from Congress only allowed me to purchase the island of New Orleans, as well as to negotiate the treaty for a customs house on this island at the mouth of the Mississippi. But when I arrived at Le Havre on April, I forget if it was 9th or 19th of 1802, I was immediately notified by our minister then, Mr. Livingston, that Bonaparte was prepared to separate not with the island of New Orleans, but with the entirety of the territory. Thus I had to come up with a monetary difference. And thankfully we did that. And under 2 weeks, had the treaty signed, the territory was bought and paid for, and the letter notifying anyone here that that had taken place was still on its way. So Louisiana was bought and paid for by the time anyone here ever knew it was for sale, including Jefferson. But with the credit comes the criticism, and I'm all the happier he gets to accept both. But it was that time we had to wait, because I had to wait for word as to how to proceed, or if my proceedings were approved by the government. Of course, this treaty had to be ratified by the Senate, which took some time. But in the meantime, we attended a coronation, and you paid a call to have us visit you. You were convalescing, as was I. Might as well say I purchased Louisiana on my back in the supine position. You yourself were...
Indeed, I had fallen due to the ice on the Place Louis XV, or now then called the Place de la Révolution, and finally called by Bonaparte the Place de la Concorde. And there I had broken my hip, and so thus I was recuperating at La Grange for a time, and you were kind enough to pay a call upon me.
And that's when you finally got to visit my wife, and that was the one and only, no, that's the last time we got to see her.
Returning back to your question, and now the invitation that I received in February of 1824 from President Monroe. The friendship had not changed, it had only grown. Though our lives had changed and the positions we had been given, the friendship remained the core of what was most important. So you can imagine the delight of receiving such a letter in February of 1824, saying that he would dispatch an American ship to any port in France of my choosing to retrieve me and bring me back to America as a guest of the nation. And this return back to America to meet with my dear friend, Monsieur Monroe, has truly been a delight, and our friendship has only grown.
Do you feel the same, Colonel?
Absolutely.
And pausing for questions again.
Yes, Monsieur.
Give me a job, I'm going to do it.
So it's obvious that your relationship with each other, the Marquis and Colonel Monroe, was very important. But you also have some very important neighbors not too far away, with James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. So how was the relationship between all four of you important, not just to the building of this country, but to sustaining and building it into what it is nowadays?
Well, I'll begin by answering that, because I wouldn't be here in Albemarle if it were not for Jefferson, who invites all of his friends to come and live as close to him as possible. So in 1789, as I was running for the 5th Congressional District, I had the chance to view many of the properties for sale here in Albemarle. I purchased one of them, upon which now sits our Central College, the project of his autumn years, which we are very proud of, and is still called Monroe Hill to this day. Jefferson didn't think that was close enough. He said, well, that's clear on the other side of town. Well, then a few years later, this property came up for sale. That property sold. I purchased this and expanded it through some funds left over from the sale of my Kentucky Bounty land, as well as with leftover funds from my late father-in-law's estate. And so I came to live here within 2 miles of Jefferson, who rides We used to ride on occasion when he was in better health, right down through here, and we used to sit at the parlor and confabulate for hours in the afternoon. Same with the Madisons. They visit regularly here when they pay call on Mr. Jefferson. It was Mr. Jefferson that introduced me to Mr. Madison, and he was on his way to France. And I said, well, you're my friend, you're going to be leaving. So he sent a letter of introduction to Mr. Madison, which spurred on our friendship, which lasted through that contentious election because we were running in opposition. We stood in opposition. He was, we both stood to be elected for the 5th Congressional District, their first election under the constitutional Congress, the new constitutional form of government in '89, and the election took place in February. He won, I did not, and he went off to New York. My new farm over across town. And so I've been friends with Madison ever since. Both the Secretary of War and Secretary of State, as well as serving under Governor Jefferson. Served together in office, we've all promoted each other. It was those two that conned me into running for governor. Served 3 terms. As soon as I settled here, so I thought, off to Richmond I went. But yes, we're very fortunate. But finally, I found a purchaser for Highland, which has been for sale for some time. I've accumulated $26,000 in debt during my 8 years of service and other numerous duties. And in order to pay that off, I've been forced to sell this property. But his declining health and our lack of ability of remaining close personal friends due to his illness and my living in Loudoun County now is causing me to relieve myself of this beloved home. And Oak Hill will remain my primary residence from here on out. The end of Highland's tenure. Now, when did you meet Mr. Jefferson and Madison?
So I have the luxury of, despite the differences of political opinions of my dear friends, I remain friends with them all. So as to Monsieur Jefferson, I met him when he was serving as governor of Virginia during the war. Rather difficult time, for Washington had dispatched me to Virginia to assume command of the newly formed Light Infantry Division, and we played the cat and mouse campaign against Lord Cornwallis. Unfortunately, I was the mouse the majority of the time. But regardless, we would of course meet again when he was dispatched to France. Our ships passed in the night, for he was en route to France, I was en route to America to celebrate the signing of the Treaty of Paris, but I would return in January of 1785, and we traveled in the same circles, so thus this wonderful friendship betwixt Monsieur Jefferson and myself began. As to Monsieur Madison, we had met in January of 1782. He was a member of Congress then. It was after Yorktown. I was en route to Boston to board a ship to return back to France. There was talk in France of an invasion of England, and perhaps I was to take part in, but then again, we French have been talking about that since 1066. And it did not come to pass. But regardless, I met with Monsieur Madison, that member of Congress, and he bestowed upon me 2,000 pounds sterling for money I had spent during the Virginia campaign. It was a very nice gesture, but I spent upwards of 167,000. But nonetheless, again, very pleasant. And I also received letters of introduction that I would serve as advisor to all American ambassadors abroad while they were in Europe. But Monsieur Madison and I, though I was friends with him, I was friends because I felt obliged to be. The true friendship began in 1784. Upon my return, once again, to celebrate the signing of the Treaty of Paris, we met again, oddly enough, in Baltimore once more. I had never seen New York City before, and he had, so he decided to travel with me. So we traveled to New York City, and while we were there, we met members of Congress who requested that we go up the Hudson River and cross over to the Mohawk Valley. There we might parley and form a treaty with members of the Iroquois-speaking peoples, most notably that of the Oneida, who had allied themselves with the Americans along with the Tuscarora during the war. now that the war was won, an official treaty could be made. And perhaps you are unaware, monsieur, I had been adopted by members of the Oniataka, the Oneida, in 1778, bestowing upon me my Oneida name, which is Koailea, which means great warrior. I must admit, I don't mind a name such as that. But regardless, we were able to parley with them and negotiate treaties with them betwixt the American people and that of the Oneida. And so thus now a friendship truly had blossomed between Monsieur Madison and myself. And upon my return back to France, of course, I've continued to correspond with both Jefferson and Madison until our return. Now that I have come back, I was able to last year visit not only with Monsieur Jefferson at his beloved Monticello, but then we crossed over to Orange, Virginia. I am told there is more to Orange, Virginia than just Montpellier. But we were then able to meet with the three of us together once again. Truly delight, and I consider them amongst my best of friends.
Like every good cat, if you build a box and set it out, the cat will eventually get in it. And I think the box was your fault.
My compliments to your mantua maker, madame. Your gown is exquisite.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I hope you've enjoyed your tour. You've had quite a grand tour of all the new states and your previous states that you visited. But I hear you might be thinking of going back to France. What will you do now once you return to France? And also for President Monroe, what will you do now that you're not in office?
I'll start with that. Rest.
Wow.
Well, madame, yes, it is true. I shall be returning back to France. In fact, your newly elected president, John Quincy Adams, has invited me to a birthday party at the Maison Blanche, at the White House, there on the 6th of September, which is, of course, my birthday. And then I shall board an American warship, I believe that has been rechristened the Brandywine. And then I shall return back to France. But there is much political upheaval within France. In fact, one of the reasons why I came back to America was not only to see my beloved friends and the country that I love so dearly, but also there was a great upheaval within the king, Charles X. Not very popular, and I am not a great admirer of him. And I think as a result of this upheaval, there shall be political upheaval and change is going to occur. And I shall perhaps return to my age-old position as commander of the National Guard, to try to keep order in the chaos of revolution. But other than that, I shall perhaps mirror my dear friend Monsieur Monroe and make great attempts to do a bit of resting. But I shall always lend my voice, my right arm, my pen, and my purse to fight for the rights of mankind. That shall be ever present.
Oh, there's a question back
Yes.
there.
You may have hit pause. Sometimes you have to cycle through.
The revolution between the American Revolution versus the French Revolution. So historically, we tend to think about the American Revolution being led by aristocrats, Lafayette, Jefferson. Was that the same perception in the French when it happened?
A very interesting question that Monsieur asks in regards when we think of the American Revolution being run by aristocrats, so the landed gentry, as you would call it here in the Americas. Was it the same in the French Revolution as well? Indeed, it was not, monsieur. It was indeed a composite of the three estates, whether it be the first estate of the clergy, the second estate of the aristocracy, or the third estate of the common man. And we see the evolution of the revolution in France undergo a great deal of change, as we have already touched upon here, from that constitutional monarchy to the republic. And really, during that transition period of the republic to the final destination of the consulate that will be created by Bonaparte in 1799, we are seeing many rise to power by merit as opposed to their birth. In fact, Bonaparte, one thing he shall be remembered for greatly is that he did elevate people by merit as opposed to by birth or by wealth. As a result, if someone is best suited for a position, they shall have it simply by their ability as a result. So when we see the consulate form of these revolutionaries, we are seeing the common man being able to rise up. After all, Bonaparte would often say that there is a marshal's baton in every soldier's knapsack, meaning that even the common soldier could elevate himself to the greatest heights and highest position by their ability. But he would exchange the monarchy of the Bourbon family for the Bonaparte family and just recreate a monarchy as a result with the Empire of 1804, which my illustrious friend, Mr. Monroe, was present at the coronation. So we have seen some positive aspects of it, but I would say that the French Revolution was not dominated by the members of the aristocracy, but rather by the common man proving himself, elevating himself by his own merits. I hope that answered your question.
I believe.
Yes?
Oh,
The
go
mademoiselle.
ahead. Go ahead.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Joanna.
I'm coming. Who's got the question?
Joanna.
Test.
There you go.
Back to the Monroe, Jefferson, Madison. I'm genuinely curious. How much wine cellars have you emptied on the floor? And how does one withhold such amount of wine?
Don't answer that.
My dear friend, Mr. Monroe, says he's an attorney and I should not answer that. In truth, I can answer with great truth. I emptied no wine cellars. Indeed, there have been legends saying that the dumbwaiter broke at Monticello because so many wines were brought up from below stairs. And Monsieur Jefferson, Monsieur Madison, Monsieur Monroe and I all will enjoy a good glass of wine, but more often than not, we will cut it with water, even the great Chambertin. So I think perhaps as time goes by, some of these stories shall perhaps be embellished. Can you imagine people embellishing stories over time? So indeed, we try to keep our heads about ourselves.
And I can answer this question directly because I too, it's forgotten, I took this same tour myself, just like President Washington did. The first president, I was only the second and the only other to do so. But of course, it took me 2 years. I did the northern states, just like Washington, in 18 and 17, and then the southern tour a year or two later. And so I endured similar circumstances as Washington did, being feted and dined. Every town, every crossroad that you arrive at thinks that they're the ones that are going to impress you. And they want to have their time. They want to have their moment, at least to attempt to garnish some attention and to try to impress you with their approbation. And it's very heartwarming, and we do adore it. But you cannot travel at the pace at which you are now traveling, at the pace of which I traveled many years ago, and of course, at the pace of which Washington traveled during his tour, consuming that much alcohol. It doesn't work.
There's one more pre-submitted question from the audience, and then I think we have maybe time for this and one more. But you mentioned earlier during the really excellent question about your relationship with Monroe and Jefferson and Madison, and you mentioned your differences of opinion with them. This question pertains to that. And was it difficult for you to have dear friends who were slave owners? What role did that play in your conversations and in your relationship, your ideologies being at odds?
That is a superb question, Madame. Indeed, in regard to the horrible institution of slavery. And my comrades, my friends, who employed the use of slaves throughout their lives. After Yorktown in 1781, I was returning back to France, and I wrote a letter to General Washington, in which I stated a great many things within that letter. But chief amongst them was about the institution of slavery. I said to Washington that he would be an even greater man than he already is if he could set the example by emancipating the slaves, thereby others could follow his example, and he could eradicate this horrible institution. Washington, of course, responded with very kind words, saying that I was a credit to humanity, but he felt it could not be done immediately. that it had to be done slowly and through legislation for fear of a grand slave revolt on par with that of the great Spartacus of the 1st century BC. Well, I believe action speaks louder than words. So my beloved wife Adrienne and myself in 1785 concocted a plan we called La Belle Gabrielle. It was a plantation in French Guiana, in which it was thought that we could do a slow emancipation of the enslaved by providing them with an education, tools, a trade, and thus, once they achieved that and the knowledge of how to read and write and that trade, they could become productive members of society, and thus we could put an end to this horrible institution. With the revolution in France, of course, we did not see it come to fruition. But despite the fact that men such as Washington and Jefferson and Madison and I dare say Monsieur Monroe possessed the enslaved, I always wanted to continue the conversation. I would not end the conversation simply because they had enslaved peoples upon their property that worked for them, that they owned and sold and used as property. But I felt that dialogue needed to continue. But Madame, at several occasions upon my return, I have stated that had I known that I was founding a nation of slavery, I would have never come. That is profound, but it is sincere in my belief. And thus, as I had mentioned before, Madame, I shall continue to lend my voice, my right arm, my pen, and my purse until we put an end to this horrible institution.
I think we have time for one final question.
Yes.
What's your opinion on
Halfway. What is
You knew it was coming.
30 seconds on Napoleon.
What is my opinion upon Napoleon Bonaparte? Well, I've mentioned briefly that it is due to Napoleon in his first Italian campaign of 1796 and 97 that I was given my freedom. For he was en route to Vienna, defeating the Austrian armies left and right, and at Campo Formio a treaty was signed in which I would be, in fact, released. In 1799, he took the chaos of the revolution and the Directoire and performed a coup d'etat, seizure of government to become master of France. It was then that many were hopeful that he would restore the constitutional monarchy, in fact receiving a letter from Louis XVIII saying, "Thank you for restoring my place within the French regime." But Bonaparte was in favor of Bonaparte, and so thus as a result he would remain. We did not get along very well. In fact, case in point, upon the news of the death of His Excellency President Washington, we received word in France, and there was a gathering held at a place called Les Invalides on the left bank of the River Seine. Oddly enough, I, the one man in all of France, perhaps most associated with His Excellency, did not receive an invitation. My son had made his way within, and he said they spoke more of themselves than they did of the great Washington. Bonaparte and I would meet periodically. I think he knew I would tell him the truth about his policies, about his decisions. I would not be given any positions after he initially had asked me to become ambassador to France, from France to America, to become one of his senators, even to be one of his general officers. The reason I declined him is because I would have to believe in his policies. And what did I believe in? A constitutional monarchy. When he first was forced to abdicate in April of 1814, went to the island of Elba, he would escape and he would return back to France in what many call the 100 days that would end at Waterloo. Well, it was during that time, with the restoration of the monarchy briefly, that I was once again made commander of the Garde Nationale. When he took power once again, he requested the support of the National Guard, and I refused him. And so he referred to me as the greatest traitor in all of France. Was I a traitor? No. I was not. I simply did not want Rouen to return. Now, when he was forced into exile again on the island of Sainte Helene in 1821, he would expire. But before that, in 1820, I received words that his conditions on the island of Sainte Helene were horrible, and that he was being mistreated, and that perhaps he was even being poisoned. In the French royalist newspapers, they would not print such a thing. They wanted him to expire. But I believe in human rights, even those that opposed me politically. So I wrote to a friend in America requesting that in American papers that this information could be revealed so the conditions would improve. Of course, May 5th, 1821 would come and the Emperor Napoleon had expired, and so there was no longer any need for that. But despite our differences, despite his willingness not to elevate my son, who served in his armies, or myself, I still believe in human rights. So though we have a difference of opinion, just like the institution of slavery, and those that still agree with it, I can open a dialogue. I can have a conversation with them in the hope that there can be some sort of resolution. Thus my opinions on Bonaparte.
I thank you heartily for your conversation with us.
And we thank you all for your attendance.
Yes,
and being here with us.
and these magnificent questions, one and all. We are firm believers that all of the answers to the future might be found in the past if we study our history. And I can see you are all students of history, so it shall make you better citizens of the future. Thank you, dear friends.
We will allow you and our esteemed guests a brief repose. The rest of the day is choose your own historical adventure. In about, 10 minutes or so, we'll give you a brief repast, as I said, to the facilities and get yourself a beverage. In here, we call this the lower level of the barn. There will be dramatic readings of correspondences from Monsieur Lafayette to Monroe, Monroe to Monsieur Lafayette, as well as some correspondences they have to other significant people in their lives. Upstairs, we have a number of special collections items for you, including some historical newspapers that were published in, or the National Television, yes, that were published.
Just a few days ago.
Just a few days ago, here. We have Colonel Monroe's dress waistcoat, his bicorn hat, some of his books, and presidential china, as well as a archaeology learning station. So this is a site of modern discovery as well as historical discovery. Those will be visit as you will upstairs. I will be up there, and Dr. Von Harper will be up there briefly as well. You are also invited to continue conversing with our friends, visit areas of the exhibits that you did not get to see, and generally enjoy yourselves in the beautiful Virginia landscape. So I will let you do that. But okay, you're free to go now.
Alright guys, that is it. Okay. Oh my gosh, we gotta hold the battery! Whoa! Okay. Oh my god, we're done. Yeah. Yeah. Put in my pocket. Put in my pocket. Yeah. Wow. Okay guys, we're done now. But not really.
That way.
Yeah. Should we go there? Yeah. Yeah. Okay guys, we're gonna move on to part 5. I know this one is so long guys, so yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you in part 5 for the Monroe's Highland. Yep. Oh my gosh. Man, not everyone gets to come out. Yeah. Alright, we're gonna go upstairs and see what we got here. Oh my god. Yeah. Whoa. Yeah, look at this. Oh, there it is. Okay, this is for part 5, so yeah, goodbye. Bye. Alright, bye guys.